Hi Hires, so we're looking at sustainability and interdependence, and in particular we're looking at Area 3 and crop protection. Okay, so one of our biggest problems is that we've just created the perfect conditions for competition, because what you've done is produce an area which is just right for plants to grow, the ones you want to grow and also the ones you don't. So our biggest issue quite often is weeds. So that's any plant, a wild plant which is growing where you don't want it and it's now in competition with your cultivated ones. So competition is a problem because if that weed is taking resources that the cultivated plant now can't get, then obviously it means that you've got less growth rate. Okay, so you end up with not an ideal yield. So the weeds themselves, you need to recognise, are obviously adapted for what they're doing. Okay, so they're going to be they're looking at fast growth generally, and they're swiftly out competing the crops which are there. So we have two different classes that we put weeds into, annuals and perennials. If you are a gardener, then you might already know quite a bit about this. Okay, if you're not, then this might just look quite bizarre. Okay, so an annual means yearly. So that means that you have a plant which from everything goes through its entire life cycle in 1 year. So it'll grow from the seed, it'll flower, it'll produce new seeds and send them off. Okay, and then it'll die off. Perennials are ones which grow over several years. So you have something which just gets bigger and bigger basically, or gets to its maximal growth and then just produces new growth each year and seeds each year. So these are two different sets which must have two different adaptations. So the annual weeds, because they are growing from seed at the start of the year, they're going to have to grow really fast. Okay, so you're looking at things which, like chickweed, which just grows fast and low, so it smothers out the other plants and blocks off their life. You're expecting a really short life cycle because they've got to do it in a year, and you're going to expect a huge amount of seed output because you're not expecting necessarily all the seeds to make it. Okay, so you can have real problems with annual weeds. I mean, this is groundsel, and if you take this up, it will still produce seeds after it's been uprooted, so you've got to get rid of it as soon as you've actually got it there. And their seeds obviously have to last for a year almost. So you can get lots and lots of long-term seed issues with annual weeds. Okay, so this is some of the adaptations for an annual. The perennial weeds, on the other hand, because they have to last for a long time, have a different set of adaptations. So generally they've got a seasonal issue to deal with, like overwintering. So they'll have storage organs, things that will be able to hold some form of energy store over the winter. So these will be in the roots, and rhizomes, which are modified roots. Generally, they go for vegetative propagation, so you're looking at something which can just produce extra copies of itself from the leaves, from stems, from roots. And this can be a real problem, because it means you might have thought you've got rid of something, but all you've really done is just left a bit there that can regrow from. So things like dandelion, big long taproot that's really difficult to get rid of. This Japanese knotweed is now a major issue in the UK because it's an invasive species, and it's a tiny section that it can grow from, and the bane of my life, brambles, because you think you've hacked it back and then just more of it grows. So we also have problems with pests. Okay, so we've got competition from weeds, and then we have other living things which come in. So this is going to be either insects or animals, anything which comes in and attacks crops, food, livestock. We are only talking about crops in this case, but just to be aware, obviously pests can affect the health of animals if you're using those as well. So this is quite, I mean, it's terrifying numbers really when you look at it. We're talking about in developed countries, okay, so 20 to 25% of the crop yield they estimate could be lost. But here's in developing countries, 40 to 50% of the crop that you should be getting, you're losing because of destruction by pest. And also, you know, that's a larger scale kind of thing, but in local areas. So you might have a particular infestation of a particular type of insect that wipes out a particular field, a particular area of crop. So this is huge. This is really important. And so you've got to ask, what is the difference between these two and what is driving it? Okay, so it's not yield competition that's causing the problem in this one is because you actually got direct damage. So if it's damage to the leaves, then you've obviously got less photosynthesis. Less photosynthesis means that you've got less available glucose to store as starch or whatever your storage is that you're using as. Okay, you can't grow as much. If it's damage to the roots, then obviously you can't do photosynthesis as well either, because you're not going to get water transport done well, and your nutrient transport is also a little bit damaged. And finally, you've just got, they're eating the crop that you might want. Okay, so it's a big issue. So there are three main classes of pests that you need to be able to state, okay, within the invertebrates. So nematodes, which are just little worms that live in the soil and they feed off roots, so that's doing the damage there. Okay, mollusks, which is your slugs and snails, and they tend to do a lot of damage at the top of the plant, so they're munching on stems and leaves. And then just generally we're going to say insects, because we have a whole pile of other ones which can attack. So that would be things like the larval stages of moths and butterflies and all sorts of other insects that feed directly on, frankly, every part of the plant. And then lastly, we have disease. Okay, so it's disease, we're looking at something which produces a symptom that is affecting an organism, okay, not as a result of physical injury. So any plant which is not healthy is obviously going to decrease the yield as well. So the pathogens that we're looking at here could be viral, could be fungal, could be bacterial. Okay, so all different sorts of pathogens can cause the disease. Okay, so how crop diseases can spread. Now this is a very common kind of system. So basically what we're looking at here is a particular type of fungus which causes leaf scald in lots of different grasses. Okay, and leaf scald is this kind of thing here where we're saying you get this kind of blotchy symptoms on the leaf that looks a little bit like it's been scalded. Okay, so this one is generally caused by a fungus which is overwintering, as it says here, in your kind of seeds and crop that's been left in the field after you've harvested little bits of it, and then it survives quite happily on that kind of bit that's there, and then you end up with an infection in the seedling which then spreads it further up the plant, and then eventually get more damage and it cycles round and round and round. So this issue is created by regrowing a crop of the same type several times in a field. So what you either have to do is somehow break this by getting rid of this infection within the soil, or you have to totally remove this. So you have to get rid of the potential for it actually getting into this plant. Okay, and we'll look at that a little bit further on. The other way that we can get a lot of disease movement is through vectors. So a vector is something that carries it from one place to another. For us, you probably know that the mosquito is an insect vector for malaria. Okay, so taking it with the blood meal from one individual to another. Okay, so here we have barley, yellow dwarf virus, using an insect vector. So these are aphids that basically just move over direct transfer from the wingless aphids down here and the winged aphids as well. Okay, so they just move it across. So we have a big issue in modern farming methods which has created some of the problems that we're trying to avoid. This is monoculture. So mono means one, culture means grow, so this is single growing basically. Okay, and monoculture means that we have taken the level of intensive farming up a notch basically. So we've got a big volume of just one plant species, and that creates all sorts of problems with trying to control the weeds, the pests and diseases, because you've got a lower biodiversity. You're unlikely to necessarily have spaces for competition from other things that would otherwise outcompete the pests. You're not giving them the option of moving to another plant because you've just created this huge area. So it's, yeah, it creates all sorts of problems. Finally, for this bit, we have to consider a very important point. Every single thing that we do, that if we go in and we say, right, okay, we're going to spray with this pesticide, you've got to know what that impact is. And to do that, you have to have a really good understanding of the entire ecosystem you're looking at. You need to know the interactions, you need to know what impacts where, and that is hard. That is difficult and complex, but really, really, really important. Okay, and this will do for this bit.